Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the C Block, our final section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news show. We usually do our international cannabis news segments in the B Block.
This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. So we have in Canada this week is Alberta has now uplifted some of their regulations when it comes to promoting and branding and sponsorships and just in the whole realm of advertising. This is something that's going to be great for the cannabis industry in Alberta due to the fact that now in Ontario, we are also kind of in the midsection of that. So it's only going to be now on par with us. Next, what we have is JC Green, which is a company that produces the brand Johnny, has recalled pretty much their whole line off the market due to a fire that happened in 2024. This isn't something that a customer had actually made a complaint about due to a foul product, but this is something that they had realized and they wanted to take into account for themselves, which is absolutely amazing. Next, what we have is Ontario is introducing a pilot project, which is going to assist in ensuring that young adults are not obtaining alcohol or cannabis. This is something where they are going to be implementing a $100,000 fine to any company or store that is doing this. But this is also going to be something where they're going to be hopefully finding a way to not only regulate, but also ensure that there are no slips within the cracks, or I should say slips within the pipes, for them to be able to be seeping through and not necessarily having a foundation which is going to be safe. So for Canada, this is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis Report. Peace.
In Arizona, it's a similar story in many states: falling prices, acquisitions, and closings. A sad chapter in a vibrant market that was the first to offer retail licenses to all licensed medical dispensaries when adult use started. Here's Karen Black with an update.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A recent study shows that Arizonans living near licensed cannabis dispensaries are significantly less likely to engage in binge drinking, suggesting the availability of cannabis may offer a harm reduction alternative to alcohol in communities across the state. In product news, Green Dot Labs is launching an exclusive new house-bred strain called Safety Meeting on December 27 at select dispensaries statewide. As we look back at 2025, Arizona's cannabis industry faced unprecedented challenges, from regulatory upheaval to structural market collapse and major operators buckling under financial pressure. The hemp fight defined much of the year. In March, Attorney General Chris Mays demanded hemp-derived THC products be pulled from gas stations and smoke shops. In June, a judge sided with Mays, ruling that all THC products, hemp and cannabis, must be sold through licensed dispensaries. The Hemp Industry Trade Association appealed, and that case is still pending, now in the context of the federal hemp ban. And the state's cannabis testing system also came under fire. Labs were fined over $1 million for contamination failures and inaccurate potency measurements, but regulators refused to disclose which labs were penalized or why, leaving consumers in the dark about supply chain integrity. Meanwhile, Arizona's medical marijuana program essentially collapsed. Patients abandoned registrations in droves, with medical sales plummeting more than 26% as consumers shifted to cheaper adult use purchases. Overall cannabis sales dropped roughly 18% year over year, forcing operators to slash prices and fight for market share in an increasingly brutal environment. And some companies didn't survive the downturn. The Cannabis Co. sold its Arizona operations to Verano for $15 million. Scottsdale-based Tilt Holdings filed for creditor protection and was delisted from public markets after losing tens of millions of dollars. And Forefront Ventures collapsed entirely, filing for receivership in June under the weight of $59 million in debt. 2025 was a year of reckoning for Arizona cannabis, where the euphoria of legalization gave way to the hard realities of mature markets, tighter regulations, and companies that couldn't keep the lights on. As we head into 2026, the industry faces a choice: adapt, consolidate, or disappear. And now there may even be a recriminalization effort. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm the executive producer, Jimmy Young, and I'm really honored to have someone that I've followed in the newsletter world, if you will, the media that is cannabis, the people that cover cannabis, and it's Kim Sanchez Rael. She is the principal at Azuca, and she's based in New Mexico. And Kim, thank you so much for taking some time out. And obviously, the first question I have to ask you is not so much about New Mexico, but about what was your reaction when you heard that the president was finally going to try to start, well, actually, to start the process of rescheduling cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 of the CSA?
Well, I think all of us in the industry are excited to see progress on the policy front, right? So I think that really what the president did is he recatalyzed the process that was started in 2022. President Biden had it wasn't an executive order, but it was a directive to begin the process. We got so far, it stalled out, and now President Trump has, which we really appreciate, he has directed the administration through an executive order to expedite the rescheduling process. So I think that obviously I'm really excited about it. I also, as I watch the press and the reactions in the industry, and I see a lot of things on social media that says the president just rescheduled cannabis. And I'm like, no. The president did not just reschedule cannabis. The president just directed the agencies under the Controlled Substances Act to move the process along. So there is still a lot of work to be done on the rulemaking process in Washington. I don't know what you've heard, but I've heard best case 6 to 9 months of rule writing and review on the administrative side, potential for litigation. So we're still, we're closer, but we're still a long way from this being actually rescheduled to Schedule 3. And then Schedule 3 is certainly not great policy for cannabis. Is it better than Schedule 1? Absolutely, right? So we're going from policy that never made any sense to a framework for federal policy that makes more sense than it did under Schedule 1, but it's still, in my opinion, not the ideal federal framework for cannabis and hemp policy.
Yeah. And I think anybody who follows this issue in our government knows that both of the past presidents had different ways of doing things, let's just say. Right. Okay. And President Biden tried to do it one way, and now President Trump is trying to do it the other way. It's a style thing more than anything else. And yet, to me, this still rights a wrong in the origin of the the Controlled Substances Act, the CSA in 1970. The fact that Richard Nixon, who drove me crazy as a 12-year-old because I didn't want my older brother to get drafted, okay, and is still haunting me to this day. And because he created the Controlled Substances Act, he had many issues. I don't want to sit here and call names because that's in the past. We can't change that. What we can do is make more sound decisions based on science and research to come up with regulations and rules that are fair to an industry that has emerged from a plant medicine that benefits so many people.
Right. And I'd say even more importantly than being fair to the industry, it's being fair to the human beings who deserve access to this botanical medicinal plant that has so many, molecules that are helpful to human beings. And that's what I'm excited about. And I think that one of the things that really I was very pleased about in the executive order language was that President Trump actually started taking what I call a one plant approach, because it wasn't just, what's termed as marijuana in federal policy. He also brought in hemp. Now, we know it's all the same plant, right? That the distinctions are really anomalies that were created by bad policy. And so I think the combination of the language in the executive order gave me great hope that we are moving towards a one plant framework for smart regulations for all of the molecules, right? That this miraculous botanical medicinal plant brings forth.
Since we won't have a Cannabis Coast to Coast news for you for 2 weeks, January 12th being the next one, we will be releasing all of these interviews in their entirety on Monday, December 28th.
I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters, and this is your Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. As always, there's a lot happening in the Great Lakes state. Let's get started. Michigan lawmakers have passed new rules targeting hemp and CBD, and they're already sparking major controversy across the cannabis industry. The legislation sets an extremely low THC limit for CBD products. So low, critics say it's nearly impossible to produce a compliant product without violating the law. Opponents warn this could effectively wipe out the CBD market and harm patients who rely on it for conditions like epilepsy and PTSD. Supporters, largely from the regulated cannabis sector, argue the rules are necessary to shut down the gas station fake weed, eliminate synthetic THC products, and ensure everything is sold is tested, licensed, and regulated. In short, one side sees overreach that could kill the CBD, while the other sees a needed step towards safety and legitimacy. As of December 17th, the bill package has only passed the Michigan Senate. Meanwhile, Michigan's looming cannabis wholesale tax is already sending shockwaves through the industry before it even takes effect. Higher Love Cannabis Company has announced layoffs of 61 employees, nearly 30% of its workforce, across 9 of the Upper Peninsula locations. With the January 1st tax deadline approaching, dispensaries are being pushed into survival mode, cutting jobs in a region where stable employment is already hard to come by. All of this is happening as cannabis prices in Michigan hit record lows. The average ounce dropped below $60 in November, driven by a massive outdoor harvest in October and an already oversaturated market. And across the border, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine says he plans to sign a bill making it illegal for Ohio residents to possess cannabis purchased out of state, including Michigan. Combined with Michigan's new tax, and these changes could discourage cross-border shoppers and put a serious dent in cannabis tourism. That's it for this week. I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Last week, Ohio passed SB 56 in their Senate, and they made significant changes to the existing licensees, including cutting back on the total number of plants you can grow at home from 12 per dwelling to 6. They also banned out-of-state cannabis to be transported from another state, and a few more other changes. Christina Brisson and other Ohioans are not exactly thrilled.
I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So as expected, Governor Mike DeWine did sign, of course, SB 56. However, he did veto the part about THC drinks. So they were trying to get that to last for another year, and now that's only going to be in that 90-day mark that was already in place for everything else. So as we know, with this bill comes a number of other bad things, where it essentially recriminalizes cannabis. So there is a little bit of hope. So I hope everybody gets out there and tries to join this cause if you're interested, and hopefully you are. The Ohioans for Cannabis Choice are trying to get a referendum in place to stop SB 56. Here's the catch. They got to get 1,000 signatures first initially and then get approved by the Secretary of State. Then following that, they've got to get another 248,000, little more than that, signatures, and then get it all in place before everything goes into effect in March. So if you see them out there, please sign it. Let's try to make that change. And given that we're here at the end of the year, someone recently asked, what is the best and worst that's happened with cannabis here in our state, in the state of Ohio? So I would say we haven't had a lot of big movement legally this year. There's been a lot of battling with this whole House bill and the intoxicating hemp. We've had the introduction of pre-rolls. We've had a lot more dispensaries, and we've had prices come down. And unfortunately, at the close of our year, we've had the worst thing happen, which is the recriminalization of cannabis, which is absolutely not what anyone wanted, not what anyone voted for. So hopefully we're going to see some changes coming in 2026. And that is your Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. President Trump has officially moved to reschedule cannabis, directing federal agencies to fast-track its reclassification under U.S. law. While cannabis is not yet fully legalized, this shift signals a softening in federal policy and opens the door for expanded medical research, regulatory reform, and most importantly for investors is capital access. So what does this mean for the cannabis stocks? First, MSOs stand to benefit the most. Rescheduling could reduce tax burdens like 280E, immediately improving profitability. That's a big deal for companies that have been revenue strong but margin constrained. Second, expect renewed institutional interest. Funds that were previously locked out due to federal restrictions may now begin dipping their toes back into the space. And third, volatility's coming. Short-term hype can cause sharp spikes, as we recently saw all the cannabis stocks soaring, but smart money will focus on balance sheets, cash flow, and market leaders, not just lottery tickets. This is the most bullish federal cannabis headline in years, but winners will be selective. Policy change creates opportunity, but execution creates profits. So trade smart and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
Next up, another trade association in the cannabis industry that is reacting to the new regulatory world of cannabis is the National Cannabis Industry Association. They will be lobbying now with these new rules that President Trump has initiated with the rescheduling process. Michelle Rutter Friberg is the director of the government relations for that organization, and she talked with our executive producer, Jimmy Young, about the historic move of cannabis off Schedule 1.
Thanks, Alaina. Now joining us is a friend from the NCIA, the National Cannabis Industry Association. She's the Director of Government Relations, right? Isn't that it? Or political?
That is correct.
Right, I got it right. It's Michelle Rutter Friberg, and I so appreciate you joining me. Everybody I'm talking to is coming into these interviews with a smile, because there's a sense of satisfaction for any lobby group or policy group or whatever, because it's the issue of prohibition took a hit this week. I think we could say that, okay? And it wasn't a bong hit, it was a presidential hit, okay? And that being said, we could talk all you want about Republicans versus Democrats. We can talk about the style of President Biden versus the style of President Trump. They're different. We get it. We're in America. One issue is moving forward, okay? This is what I take out of it. And I think back to the fact that years ago, I think it was Paul Armentano from The Normal who said this. Think about it. Doctors used to get chastised or lose their job if they even talked about cannabis to their patients. So look at the progress that we've made. We've got 24 adult use legal states. We've got 40 odd decriminalized states. Michelle, now the work begins for people like you, because now you have to go back into Congress and explain to them what the entourage effect is, all the things that you already know, but they are going to soften. I hope the hardcore prohibitionists will be softened by this move. Do you agree with that?
I don't know about the most, and thank you first off for having me. Of course, Jimmy, always lovely to be with you. There's always people on either side of the spectrum, right? Who you'll, possibly never be able to convince. But what I think the president's executive order did, or one of the things that it did in terms of looking at it through a political lens, is it certainly provided cover to members of the Republican Party who have perhaps been more reticent or reluctant to be supportive of this issue. So, even just I think it was about a day before the president signed the order, maybe even, a couple hours before, I think it was about 21, 22 GOP senators signed a letter to the president saying, don't do this. This is a bad move. You should not move cannabis out of Schedule 1, or, it should remain there, et cetera. But that still leaves, dozens of GOP members who didn't sign on to that. So I think that in and of itself is remarkable. But again, I think it also provided cover to folks like potentially, and, maybe this is me pontificating a little bit as, in my personal opinion, but somebody like Speaker Mike Johnson, who I know for a fact has not been, super supportive of this issue and, hasn't necessarily been quick to advance it. Not that there's been too many opportunities, unfortunately, throughout the committees and, various House of Representatives processes. But regardless, I think that, just to give an example, that the president's executive order and the statements that he made yesterday provided a lot of cover to not only Speaker Johnson, but to a number of folks in his party to sort of step out and give them sort of permission, if you will, on this issue, because we know that the GOP is looking very, very much to the president sort of for not directives. I don't want to, paint them as sheep in any way, but regardless, no one wants to be out of step with the president when they are, part of the same party.
Right.
And finally, tonight, while advocates have focused on getting cannabis off Schedule 1, can celebrate a win, the fact is cannabis is still illegal at the federal level. Banks are still apprehensive to do any banking with cannabis companies. And while the relief from the dreaded 280E tax code is a win that will immediately open up margins for all cannabis businesses, this is still the most regulated industry in history. In the meantime, you will see thousands of commercials on alcohol, legal prescription drugs, and now sports gambling, all with disclaimers about using these adult products and activities responsibly. Only time will tell what impact on the future this historic move will have on the industry. But now it's to step back and realize that for 50 years, cannabis has been sitting as a controlled substance with other drugs that are far more addictive and dangerous than weed. So while legalization and descheduling remains the goal for the industry, this is one huge hurdle that needed to change, and now it has. That'll do it for our final news show of 2025. We will be back after our annual 2-week break. From all of us here at WPCM TV and Cannabis Coast to Coast News, have a wonderful, happy, safe holiday and a great new year. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. We encourage you all to consume it responsibly. See you next year.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amie Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amie Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis, Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean,
the quicker picker-upper. I love that.
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Alaina Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views, with 17 million impressions, and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com.